Hello, Endgame fam. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone. Hopefully you had a good day, and I mean that also in the fantasy sense. Hopefully your fantasy lineup for the playoffs looked more like this and not this. With week 17 ahead, we're looking at championship week for most of you. Let's look back and see who shined the brightest on Christmas that could help you and your fantasy team next week. But first, the injury report, because even on holidays, the injuries never take a break. And it looks like the Grinch made his home in Minnesota because several key injuries there. And let's start with TJ Hawkinson, stud tight end. He had himself a decent game before leaving with a knee injury, had 4 catches for 58 yards. He took a hard shot to the knee in this game and did not come back. We're going to have to see what the deal is, whether he's going to be available next week at all. And Jordan Addison also, this one early, if you start him, gave you almost nothing because he took some friendly fire on a return from one of Nick Mullins' many interceptions. And an ankle issue cropped up. He didn't come back either, so definitely something to monitor. Jalen Waddle of the Dolphins, also a guy who's had all sorts of things back and forth. Nothing that's forced him out to miss a lot of time, but in this game against the Cowboys, Waddle at one point was limping with an ankle issue, and that's after previously already having left, getting poked in the eye. That's nothing to worry about, but the ankle might be a problem. Another huge game for the Dolphins coming up against the Ravens next week, so they're going to need him, but we'll have to keep an eye on his practice reports. Another team that got hit hard with key injuries was the Bears. First of all, Cole Kmet, who was on his way to a huge game potentially, had 104 yards just in the first half. But then he left, knee issue. Remember, he was questionable heading into this week already. It's not that he took a particularly hard hit, but obviously that knee is still bothering him. So this is something that definitely could keep him out for week 17. And I should also mention DJ Moore very early in that game, went to the medical tent and did come back, and he played the rest of the game, but did almost nothing. So it was pretty obvious he was used as a decoy. I mean, he gutted it out, but it killed you in fantasy. I have a feeling he'll play next week because he did manage to finish the game, but yeah, that stings. And then the Packers, have just not been able to stay healthy at receiver for whatever reason. Well, you knew Jaden Reed was out, Christian Watson was out, Dontavian Wicks a chance to step up. He did by scoring, and then he left also with another injury. This time it was a chest. After the game, he said that no ribs were broken, doesn't seem to be anything too serious, but when asked about next week, he just said, we'll see. So let's see who could step up and help you if you're looking for a streamer at a certain position, another injury replacement, just somebody who you feel could go off in this championship week for most of you. So let's go to Minnesota, who did step up with both Addison and Hawk going out. It was KJ Osborn, next man up, and he did step up. 5 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown. Of course, this kind of came out of nowhere. He was used because, number one, the injuries. Number two, they were down big and needed to throw it a lot. But hey, give him credit. He made the big plays. We know this offense, no matter who's at quarterback, is just going to throw it a lot, and that's what Nick Mullins did. Not very good in real life with all those turnovers, and they didn't win the game. But hey, for fantasy, we don't care. Osborn put up numbers, and if Addison and or Hawk are out next week, he should again. The Vikings get a rematch with the Packers, whose defenses looked like a sieve the last couple of weeks. A lot of fans calling for the head of defensive coordinator Joe Barry. We'll see if that happens, but either way, you got to feel like this is a good spot for him. And these teams are both fighting to stay relevant in the playoff race, and so they're going to have to slug it out through the air, most likely. So on the flip side of that matchup, talked about Green Bay not being able to keep receivers healthy. Well, one guy has been healthy, and that's Romeo Doubs. He also stepped up when needed, went for 79 yards and a touchdown in Week 16. It's easy to forget about Doubs. Wicks was the guy that a lot of you went to flex this week if you're missing Jaden Reed or somebody else, because Wicks had some big games, was looking like he was coming into his own, and Doubs has just not done much. Not even 40 yards in 3 of the last 4 games. And 8 of the last 10 games, not even a 40-yard game. And throughout the early part of the season, well, he had been scoring touchdowns pretty frequently. He hadn't scored a touchdown in over a month. So, of course, the way fantasy football works, as soon as you forget about a guy, he has a pretty good game. And look, he could be a factor next week because if all 3 of these receivers, talking about Watson, Reed, and Wicks, are out again, he is the number 1 guy by far there. Not a bad spot against the Vikings. Just said this game should feature a lot of passing, and the defenses aren't that great. Vikings defense, give them credit, they've been much better than last year, and they had been kind of settling down lately, but they still give up pretty big games to number one receivers. And even though Dobbs isn't what you would think of as a number one guy, he might be the Packers' number one guy next week. Here's another veteran wide receiver you may have forgotten about, but could go off next week, DJ Chark in Carolina. It's been easy to forget about this entire Panthers passing game because there really hasn't been a passing game. It was all Adam Thielen the first half of the year, and then it was all nothing lately. But I actually have multiple reasons to be interested in Chark next week. One of them, of course, he just had a huge game. 2 touchdowns, 98 yards, and 6 catches. Well, he'll do this every once in a while, right? But it doesn't sustain itself. But what I'm actually more interested in isn't Chark's stat line. It's Bryce Young. Everyone's writing him off. He's a bust. It was a wasted pick, terrible trade for the Panthers, all this. Bryce Young needs a change in coaching, needs some more weapons at receiver, needs some time, all right? But look at what he did in this game and look at what he's done lately. In Week 16, Bryce Young went over 300 yards passing for the first time in his NFL career. And with those 2 TDs to Chark, he had his second ever multi-touchdown game. But this also marks his 3rd straight game without throwing a single interception. That's all a sign of progress. But Carolina's not playing for anything right now other than to try to develop Young and the team around him. So they're going to keep throwing him out there, let him actually do something with the ball, not like what Frank Reich did and try to protect him and keep him bottled up. Young is going to get a chance to show what he can do, and he's doing it. But I'll also say on behalf of Chark, next week, it's a great spot because it's the Jaguars, who have still been one of the worst passing defenses, generous to quarterbacks and especially wide receivers this whole season. And then I don't know what's going on with this Jags team. Have you seen? They just seem to be falling apart lately. And bonus, if you're into that kind of thing, DJ Chark, revenge game. Remember, he used to be a Jaguar. All right, one more veteran receiver, but we have to now pay attention again, if you haven't already, to Demarcus Robinson for the Rams. I mentioned Robinson 2 weeks ago, and it seems like not a lot of people have picked him up, didn't take him seriously, whatever. So I'm going to have to say it again. Demarcus Robinson has a role on this Rams offense, and you want a piece of this Rams offense. Robinson now has 4 straight games with a touchdown, and he's gotten at least 40 yards in each of those games. So it's not just a little short score and that's it. He had some big yardage last week. In fact, you probably know this, he outperformed Cooper Kupp. Robinson's an easy scoop off waivers. Nobody's bidding up high for him. Look, I know the ceiling isn't tremendously high. He's not going to put up Kupp or Puka numbers, but he could get you another touchdown, could get you solid yardage and a few catches. It's the Giants this week. Good chance he keeps it going. All right, time for a running back. We have to go to Khalil Herbert of the Bears. Didn't really expect much from Herbert, and I know it's easy to go back and look. Of course, we should have seen his big game coming. It's the Cardinals, right? Great spot. He was going to be the guy. Deontay Foreman was injured. Okay, but still, this is the first time in over a month that we've seen Khalil Herbert even get double-digit carries. The last time he had touched the ball even as much as 10 times was November 19th, and in that game he had 16 carries for 35 yards. It seemed like Herbert had been phased out of this offensive game plan. With or without Foreman, I don't think that was really the issue. But something worked in Herbert's favor this week, and I already talked about it. It wasn't just Foreman being out. It was both Cole Kmet and DJ Moore, their 2 top pass catchers by far, getting hurt in the same game. Kmet didn't come back, and Moore did, but shouldn't have because he was just a decoy. And it was the Arizona Cardinals, who are absolutely terrible against the run, and the Bears really didn't need to pass that much because Cardinals didn't put up a fight. So everything kind of conspired for Herbert to have a really good game. But we have to look at him for next week because, first of all, Foreman could be out again next week. Kmet could be out next week. Moore, we'll see if he's healthy. And the Bears actually don't have a bad matchup either. They'll be at home going against the Falcons, who against the run aren't that bad, but still, this is not a team that is going to run up the score and put negative game script on the Bears. They're going to probably lean on Herbert again. And with Herbert, the downside is he's just not a pass-catching back. So we talk about him versus Rashawn Johnson. Typically, you like Rashawn better because of that floor, that pass-catching upside that helps you in PPR leagues. But Khalil Herbert just seems like the more explosive runner, and he has that home run ability. It's week 17. Forget playing it safe. You want a guy running back who can help fill in for injury, has some upside. It's Herbert. All right, now if you are still streaming quarterback or you just still need help, look, I'll just say this. By now, those of you maybe lost Burrow or Herbert, just have been streaming all year, if you got Stafford a couple of weeks ago when I talked about him, you're good. If you picked up Joe Flacco last week, you know what? Even though he gets the Jets in week 17, I still think you're good. Hopefully you have somebody that you can just put in your lineup right now and you feel good enough about. If you don't, or if you're just in one of these leagues where people hoard quarterbacks, or you're just still looking for the most upside on the waiver wire, well, this week I'm going to go to Derek Carr. Same reasoning as all the other players I've talked about, not just who's coming off a big game last week. Last week is over, that's history. Who's going to have a big week in week 17? I think it could be Carr again because if you look at the matchup, it's the Bucs. Tampa Bay has now allowed the most passing yards of any defense. And that's even despite playing Trevor Lawrence just now, who just does not look good. Carr coming off his best game arguably of the season, 319 yards and 3 touchdowns. Olave healthy and Shaheed healthy. You know he can air it out. You know they like to throw it, especially in the red zone. So Carr definitely has that upside you're looking for. And again, this is one of those games, Saints-Bucks, they are battling along with Atlanta, but head-to-head, this is going to tell a lot as far as who's going to win that division or have a chance. And while the Bucs aren't as much of a pass funnel defense as they have been in the past, this is still a team that's easier to pass on, obviously, and harder to run on. Kamara just hasn't looked very fresh lately. Carr has been airing it out. He's got that big game potential, so you're looking for that at quarterback, I'm going to go Carr. And for all my tight end streamers out there, or if you need somebody possibly to replace TJ Hawkinson or Cole Kmet, who already mentioned are injured, let's go a little deeper here. How about Chig Okonkwo? It's been a while since I mentioned any Titan recommended somebody in that passing game especially, but we can look at Chig again now for a couple of reasons. Now let me tell you, one of the reasons is not just because Ryan Tannehill, as if he makes me feel better about this offense in any way. It's the same system. Tannehill's the same guy he's always been. But we should note that Chig did have the most targets on the team in week 16. Came away with 6 catches on all 6 of his targets, 63 yards and a touchdown. When you get a quarterback who prefers to throw it across the middle, especially to a tight end, that's worth noting. And when you look to next week, this could be the perfect spot for Okonkwo because going against the Texans, again, this rematch here, Texans, 3rd most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Okonkwo didn't have a big game against the Texans just a week ago, I know this. But this was the game that Levis started and played and got hurt in. They could very well have a different plan of attack here. Derrick Henry got totally bottled up. We know that defense is going to just try to contain the running game. So if the Titans are smart, they'll spread it out a little bit more. And I think Okonkwo now has to be part of that plan. And then finally, I want to say, first of all, if you have Christian McCaffrey on your roster, this should have already been done weeks ago. And if you are just really hurting, desperate running back, you could even consider picking up one of these guys. Let's talk Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason. Now, if you have CMC, there's no excuse not to have pretty much both these guys on standby and rostered. And not just because injuries happen to everybody, but also, look, if there is a team that might consider sitting or limiting some of its starters, it might be the 49ers. And that's especially the case this next coming game because they get the Commanders. So it goes without saying, these are your insurance policies. But let me tell you, there could be standalone value here because if, as we anticipate, the 49ers beat Washington and potentially get a big, this has happened time and time again to the Commanders, even happened against the Jets this week. Somehow they came back and made it a game. But even the Jets went up big on Washington with their offense and Breece Hall going crazy. If the 49ers are up big, we could see some garbage time points here. Now, I wish I could just pick a guy, but, with the Niners, Mitchell should be the backup. Mason's been getting more run lately. Going to have to kind of read into some of the beat reports and see who they feel is going to be next up. I think it could be Mason, but I will just say either way, pick up one or both of these guys, and you could have yourself a sneaky start. Here's hoping everybody has a very happy new year and a very good end to your fantasy season. We got you covered all the way until season end. Don't forget to check the playlist for week 17 for everything you need to bring home that chip.